Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Council briefing of the 16th of March 2021. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to Elders past, present and emerging. CEO, just noting that we have no apologies this evening and that we do have Councillor Loden attending via Zoom. I'm just wondering if it's possible to see Councillor Loden's face on the screen, just in case he wishes to put his hand up. Can't see you at the moment, Councillor Loden.
If I speak, does that help? Does it...
There you go, no, supersized.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our meeting. I'm now opening public question time, and this is your opportunity to come and address Council. We do ask that you state your name and the suburb in which you reside, and we do ask that you speak for up to 3 minutes. There's no set order, it's just whoever would like to come first, and we have a regular who knows the drill. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Hello again. I'm speaking on behalf of, a bunch of other neighbours that are on Eaton Strait that have previously objected over the last 3 years.
Sorry, Damien, you still do need to state your name.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Damien Kerr at 44 Eaton Street. And just objecting or speaking to number 48 and 48A Eaton Street. I'm not sure the agenda number. So like I said, I'm just speaking on behalf of the other objectors that are also in the street who've objected this time and previously. I guess our objection remains the same for both blocks as it was in 2018. The landowner has created some of the smallest residential blocks in Mount Hawthorne and then shoehorned in as much building area as they could onto the site, which in this process, it's no surprise they still cannot provide a compliant design. The impact on this development on my property, 44, is that it'll set the precedent what could be developed on 46 and in the future, as number 46 directly north of me is the same size as 48. Although designed for 48, the south lot has finally changed and been improved from previous design. The new layout for 48 Egina creates a new issue that has never been seen on any of the previous 3 proposals. Previously, the central boundary of the subdivided lots shared a long boundary wall, and the boundary wall impact to the neighboring lots was just to the garage, 6 meters. I guess now there's a 16.6 meter long boundary wall along 46 Eugenia Street instead of the previous 6 meters. Now this would be compliant if this was the only lot boundary wall, but it's not. Number 48 also has a 6 meter long boundary wall of their garage on the north side. Our codes, part 5, clause 3.2, item 3 states in area coded R30 or higher, walls no higher than 3.5 with an average of 3 or less for 2/3 of the length of the balance of the lot boundary behind the front setback to one sound side boundary only. The key part here is to one side boundary only. Number 48 proposal has 2 lot boundary walls, and the newer, longer boundary wall has a direct impact on number 46. This relates back to my original objection. The developer has created these small blocks and can't make them work. So why should they be provided discretion from council for the shortcomings in their design after they're the ones that have created these small blocks? I guess if they employed a setback to either of these boundary walls, they would be compliant, but this would majorly impact their design. I get that. So I just think if the lot 48 was mirrored as per the other previous 3 designs, the impact on number 46 would be much less. And this would have no impact on the drawing yard for number 48 if it was located on the south side, because currently the drawing yard of 48 is going to have no sunlight anyway, because there's going to be a 2-story boundary wall from 48A that's going to obstruct it. And really, the outlook from 48 would probably be better on the south side because you'd actually see some blue sky rather than walking out and seeing the double-story boundary wall. So I think it's just that 48 could be mirrored like it was before. That's really my only objection, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Damien. I'm his next door neighbour, David Wilson, number 46, directly adjacent to the number 48 proposal. Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to speak. As Damien stated, the boundary wall extends along the boundary for 16.6 metres now, directly adjacent to my property. This is an increase of 10 metres from previous submissions. This does not comply with the Residential Code 5.1.3 in that it's an inverse impact on the amenity to the adjoining property, being mine. My property number 46 has a mature tree close to the boundary. This will be severely impacted, likely killed because of the development. My property has a small deck on this side. This will be a poor, unfriendly amenity once a long wall is built alongside. As Damien stated, it doesn't appear to comply with state planning policy either, which says for 2/3 the length of balance of one side only. This has a boundary side on my side, 16.6 metres and 6 on their north. I request council require some amendment to the development before it's accepted. Boundary wall to 46 should be amended, could be reversed. So the long wall is on the number 48A side, with the drawing area on the south rather than the north. This would reduce the boundary wall to my side. Alternatively, because of such a small block, the whole development could be reduced. Alternative to this, the landscaping is way below the required 30% at just over 21%. That doesn't appear to comply with council's built form policy either. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. Next speaker, please.
This looks familiar. Thank you for your time, Mayor Cole and councillors. My name is Catherine Athanasiou and I confirm that my husband and I reside at 33 The Boulevard in Mount Hawthorn. I'm here tonight to voice my concerns regarding the recent character retention and heritage areas amendments to the local planning policy of small sections of 3 streets in Mount Hawthorn, namely the Boulevard, Kagoli and Matlock. My husband and I fervently oppose the suggestion of our house falling under this character retention policy. As owners of our property, we have every right to develop or improve our land subject to council building requirements as all other residents in our suburb. We are concerned that the possible inclusion of our home in the retention scheme will have a negative effect on our property. Our views may be different if the entire suburb wished to be included in some form of character retention. However, to single out small sections of 3 streets seems preposterous, discriminatory, and begs the question why. We're concerned that the current push for consideration of character retention for our street is motivated by a core group who tried to approach us 2 years ago at an annual Christmas party where alcohol was present to agree to the scheme without
Catherine,
providing...
can you just speak about the planning merits? We don't sort of go into assumptions about neighbours.
Yep. The next we heard about the issue was a letter sent to us by Mr Tim Elliott in July 2019, giving us 7 days notice of that event. We were unable to attend, but we shared our views in writing. I'm presuming that our objection was added to the final figures. In November of that same year, we were invited via email to a heritage and character workshop. We received this invitation on Monday, November the 11th, with the workshop scheduled for that very Saturday. We again were unable to attend due to that late notice. The funny thing is my husband and I live in a Federation-style home and that is our preference. However, we understand that others may prefer a more modern style and the flexibility to utilise a small block. Neither is more right than the other. We also consider those that come after us and the cost this may have on the generations to come. 92 Flinders Street was recently on the market, a new build on 420 square metres. This house hit an all-time sales record for Mount Hawthorn, with the agent getting record interest in attendance and multiple high offers. Potential Mount Hawthornites don't all come looking for the same properties. I now refer to page 422 of the council briefing agenda. Please note the mathematics as to the survey question, do you support investigation into heritage areas in your street, is incorrect. It states there are 19 in support and 18 objecting, when the correct math is 17 in support and 18 objecting. I add that 11 of the supporters are outside the guideline area, or perhaps what we would call ring-ins. This would further take the supporters to 6 yes and 16 no. I put it to you, councillors, that this is a gross waste of council funds, particularly when you acknowledge on page 406 that there is only minimal support for streets to be investigated. I would also suggest that council may be involved in legal challenges to the scheme if it is pursued, costing ratepayers considerably. I implore all councillors to please consider carefully the reasons behind this nomination and the effect that this may have on the residents whose houses fall within these 3 small sections. And I ask again, is this equitable? I thank you for taking the time to consider our concerns.
Thank you, Catherine. Next speaker, please. No further speakers this evening? Oh, yep.
Thank you, Councillor and Mayor. Sorry I was a bit tardy. I didn't want to push in front of anybody else. Look, I just wanted to make some comments about Hyde Park to back up the presentation.
Ron, we know who you are, but just for the record, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and the suburb in which you reside.
Ron Alexander, 180 Palmerston Street, Perth, and a user of Hyde Park 2 or 3 times a day. I was also just talking today with John Bisker, who some of you may know, who is more an expert in the horticultural area, and I think president of the Horticultural Association, who I'm meeting with next week, and he's interested in making some presentations on Hyde Park as well. I also want to make the point is, I heard some speakers at the annual general meeting having a bit of a crack at the City of Vincent. I think the City of Vincent largely does a good job at Hyde Park, and I certainly, for one, want to work with the City of Vincent if that's possible at all, and I'm sure it is. So just to go over some of the comments I made before with regard to the big increase in gravel and blue metal and ivy. I think that has been somewhat not following any plan, and I know people who walk around Hyde Park and pick up bits of blue metal and gravel and that in their sandals and that don't particularly appreciate it. I'd also like to suggest that a group of interested residents, together with councillors, to oversee, what does happen at Hyde Park would be beneficial to all concerned. And to that end, I was suggesting that a group would get together and be part of assisting the council. Speaking with John Bisker today, some of the comments I've been making seem to have been in place in a bygone era, but currently the city's working off a plan, I understand it, that is some 29 years old. John mentioned that there was a consultation group in 2003 which put down a whole range of things that should be happening, and as he can see, they are not currently happening. So I'll just refer you, rather than go over things again, to the submission at the annual general meeting, and look forward to certainly parts of that being taken up. One of those is having a group of people who are interested in Hyde Park assist the council where possible, and also talk with people like particularly John Bisker, who's got the expertise and has been involved for a number of years. He was mentioning today that he thinks a lot of species that were planted at Hyde Park have since disappeared, and was interested in chatting with that. So I would like the opportunity to talk to people concerned with a view to what Hyde Park could be and should be. So thanks for the opportunity. Done.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate your comments in relation to the AGME. Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, it's Martin McNiff from 57 The Boulevard. I'm here to speak in agreement with the character retention, or proposing of the character retention in the surrounding streets of the Boulevard, Matlock, etc. And that was driven essentially by a reaction to a house that was built out behind myself in terms of what was built out of character, in terms of bulk form and stature. And I think that a number of streets in Mount Hawthorn should be maintained in that California bungalow, should we call our character retention. We'll lose it very quickly. And once it's gone forever. And there's a lot of time and effort being put into those streets in terms of just the characters in those houses from maybe up to 100 years ago. That'll be lost, bulldozed and gone forever. So I support character retention, and I think it's actually a very good thing, even if it is a couple of streets. But yes, it should be more wide.
Thank you, Martin. Another speaker coming forward.
Hi, Mayor and Councillor. Thank you for the councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Lisa Mazzella from 58 The Boulevard, Mount Hawthorn, and I'm here in support of the character retention policy. My partner, Jeff, and I strongly support it. I'd also like to express gratitude to the staff for putting the character retention policy together. I think it was quite a difficult task, and they've done what we think is a good job in summarising what the local character is. And finally, we really value the character of our area and believe that it's up to us to protect it for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any further speakers? Hello, Mary.
Hello, Mayor and councillors. My name is Mary Gray. I'm from Commonwealth Avenue in North Perth. Just a couple of I support the character retention, as Lisa has just said. I'm in one of the older streets, Commonwealth Avenue, which is really intact. But I'm here to talk about a couple of issues I raised at your annual general meeting concerning catchment management and the water quality that results from people's behaviour or the way with their gardens and fertilisers and so forth in their and so forth. I have given you a copy of a document that I found by chance. Our Rivers Need You. It's awareness raising. It's from many years ago about phosphorus and designed for kids and community people. There's a major problem with excess nutrients leaving and going into waterways and into the river. And as you know, algal blooms are really serious. So our waterways are already eutrophied. I worked in catchment management, back in the 90s and so forth. And certainly the advice was with lawns, your lawns, take the catcher off your mower and recycle the lawn clippings in situ, and don't put any fertiliser on your grass, on your lawn, unless it has overt symptoms. And I've been doing that for many years, but there's a lot of people who, chuck their grass clippings into the wheelie bin or whatever. And now I know you're saying that's going to go to in the new bins, but it's much better to leave it on your lawn, and then you keep what's called a closed system for phosphorus. As you know, our soils here are very leaky. Nutrients go straight through, unfortunately, unlike most other parts of the world. So there's a real need to raise community awareness about not using excess fertilisers, whether it's on the lawns or logardening. And I'd like to see a lot more awareness raising by the city and use of more local native plants that suit our landscape and also fulfil wildlife habitat and more urban cooling. Underground power would help enormously too. Anyway, but so I'll draw your attention to that. There's a lot of good stuff there, but people have no idea. And I talk to, people up the street about their lawn clippings. Okay, I'll take it off. Oh, I didn't know that. but people think, you have to take it off or it'll die. Well, that's rubbish. I mean, when you're mowing the ovals, you don't take the lawn clippings away. Anyway, we don't want toxic algal blooms. and we've had some of them in the river and in other lakes and things, and certainly the waterways are not in good condition.
Mary, have you left a copy of your document with us here this evening?
I've left a copy of that with.
It's been emailed.
It's been scanned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further comments this evening? Come forward, please.
Hi, I'm Andrea Cole from the Boulevard in Mount Hawthorn. I'm here to support the character retention policy, and particularly including the Boulevard in that character policy. My husband and I are long-term residents of the Boulevard, and we believe the character and street appeal of the homes, mostly built in the 1920s, should be respected and retained wherever possible. So future plans for house extensions or new developments on the Boulevard should be sympathetic to the 1920s character and not detract from the current street appeal. So I feel that this can be achieved through controls on setbacks, bulk and scale of buildings, and use of materials and landscaping as suggested in the policy. So we're quite concerned by a couple of two-storey new builds that we already have on the Boulevard, which I believe are imposing eyesores on the character and streetscape due to their bulk and scale. If development were to continue without considering the need for new houses and extensions to blend with the streetscape, the character of our street will be lost forever. I believe Mount Hawthorn's appeal to current and prospective residents is undoubtedly due to the predominance of character homes in leafy tree-lined streets, and it's in our long-term interests of the residents, the city and future generations to retain and respect this feature of our cherished neighbourhood, as it will be lost forever. So I'm wholeheartedly supporting the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Are there any further comments this evening or questions? Sure, come forward.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors. My name's Nick Jolly. I'm here with a company called Patio Living to represent clients Anthony and Christina Atwood. They apologise they can't be here tonight because they've just had the wonderful news of the birth of their third baby, so they've sent me along instead. We proposed a carport, and probably for the councillors to understand that better, we're item 5.4 and attachment 2. And if we could get that up possibly on the screen, that will show the site plan of where the carport's located. The Shire's objection to the carport principally was that it's located in Eaton Street in North Perth, and there are not many carports in that vicinity. It's one of the few streets left in North Perth now where carports weren't developed sort of 10, 20 years ago. They also made comment about its impact on the street, but the elevations that we produced hopefully demonstrate that the building materials and the design and the colours are in keeping with the home. It was proposed that the carport be potentially made smaller, so it had less impact, but unfortunately a smaller carport would simply mean that they can park a single car and access to the parking bay to the right of the carport would be obstructed. That's at the front. It was then proposed that the carport potentially could be put at the back of the property, but they already have a very small amenity space and a growing family. So if the carport goes into the back garden, then the challenge they have is that the kids would have probably an area measuring about 5 by 4 metres to play in. We and the owners accept the fact that we can't find many examples in Eaton Street of similar carports, but our fervent belief is that it would do the street proud. It's, we believe a very good looking structure and it fits the character and of the streetscape in the area. And I suppose like most streets in Mount Hawthorn and North Perth, at some stage in the last 10, 20 years, streets that had either very old carports or no carports at all, started by building a carport, and hopefully other owners and builders sympathetically followed. So it might be one of the first ones in Eaton Street, but there's no objections from any other neighbour that we're aware of. And we just wanted to present our case tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'm assuming there's no further speakers, but I'll just ask to be sure. Okay, thank you all very much for your comments. We appreciate you coming along. And just so you know, the items that have been raised by you are the items that we will ask questions and answers on first. So if you do want to stay, we will go to those items first. And this is just a session for council members to ask for questions or further information from administration, to flag amendments, etc. And the decision-making meeting on these items will be next Tuesday night. You are welcome, of course, to come back to that meeting. So I will go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Through Mayor Cole, we received 2 questions in writing, if we could read those out as well.
Apologies. So just also to explain that because we're still in a state of emergency, we are taking written comments, which we compile as part of the agenda, but where there are questions, we do have those read out so that we can answer those during the briefing.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. These both relate to item 5.7. The first is from Liam Burns of Mount Hawthorn. The question is, since Vincent has many streets with houses of character that would benefit from the additional oversight that character retention brings, should a more robust system be put in place sooner rather than later to propose streets or sections of streets for consideration? In fact, where streets, for example, like sections of Flinders Street, Mount Hawthorn, as there is no significant developments that have changed the character of the houses, not be automatically included or at least considered. Once a development that changes or destroys the character has taken place, the argument of precedence gains significant weight. There's also a question from Jason Hughes of Mount Hawthorn in respect to item 5.7. Would the council please confirm that the requirements of section 2.3 of policy number 7.5.15 character retention areas and heritage areas were satisfied in relation to the inclusion of portion of Kagoli Street in the character retention scheme, given, so it's got a few points, the summary of consultation results included as an attachment to the council minutes of 11th of February 2020 indicates that whilst the nominated area of Kagoli Strait received 54% support in the initial community consultation meeting, no details were provided as to whether this was 54% of the affected properties or included other unaffected properties both in and outside of Kagoli Street. B, the number of affected Kagoli Street properties that participated in the initial consultation process totalled only 4 out of 34, which is well short of the required 40%, and C, unaffected properties were included in the city's statistics as it notes that a further 5 residents in the remaining portion of Kagoli Street participated in the consultation process, with 3 in support and 2 objecting. Under clause 2.3 of the policy, the support of the unaffected properties should have been disregarded. Also, as an aside, I note that this suggests that at most only 9 residents in Kagoli Street out of over 115, which is less than 8%, participated in the initial consultation process to consider its nomination in any character retention scheme. And there's a second point, the notes to the council briefing on 9th of February indicates that 8 out of 35 affected Kagoli Street properties, which is 24%, provided responses over the course of the formal consultation process, of which 100% objected to the inclusion of the nominated portion of Kagoli Street. There's a second question. Can the council please advise why it considered appropriate that less than a majority, greater than 40% of affected properties is required to support inclusion in the scheme, but greater than a majority, so greater than 60%, is required to remove the affected portion of the scheme, and that's referring to clause 6 of the policy, and noting that 100% of respondents by affected Kagoli Street properties during the formal consultation period objected to inclusion, based on a similar approach to the seemingly being, sorry, that doesn't make sense, but basically is referring to 100% of respondents objecting. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager. CEO, over to you for declarations. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the declarations of interest are as follows. The first is from Councillor Loden in relation to item 5.2 and 5.3, 48 and 48A Agena Street, declaration affecting impartiality, noting a personal association with one of the affected residents through Councillor Loden's involvement in the fathering project. The second is from you, Mayor Cole, impartiality interest in relation to 5.7 character retention, noting you have family members living at a residence on the Boulevard. The next is a declaration of interest from you, Mayor Cole, in relation to item 5.1, 38 Summer Street, noting there may be a perception that Councillor Cole's husband is associated with the WA Prison Officers Union, but noting that he has not worked for the WA Prison Officers Union for more than 3 years. So impartiality interest from Councillor Smith in relation to item 8.9, the Audit Committee minutes, noting that one of the Audit Committee members is Councillor Smith's husband. And the last declaration is a financial interest from Councillor Toppleberg. It relates to an item within item 8.8, which is the AGM minutes and motions, a financial interest related to the commercial waste motion, noting that Councillor Toppleberg operates a business in the city that is directly impacted by the proposed changes to commercial waste collection. I note Councillor Toppleberg declared this interest when Council made the initial decision regarding commercial waste at a previous Council meeting. Councillor Toppleberg is seeking Council approval to participate in the debate on the item in general because most of the items don't impact the issue related to commercial waste. There are several other items of interest in the AGM, so Councillor Toppleberg seeking Council's view on that, and I'm assuming to apply during the discussion at the Ordinary Council meeting next week as well.
Thank you, CEO. Just in relation to that, I'll just go to the item and see how the recommendation is written.
I think to note, Councillor Toppleberg said he wouldn't discuss or participate in the debate on the commercial waste motion, but he does want to participate in the non-commercial waste discussions on those motions.
Not seeking permission to vote on the item at all.
You're not seeking to have it broken down by AGME recommendations?
I'm comfortable not voting. And I'm comfortable to depart the room while that matter is being discussed. It doesn't need to be pulled out if that's the case, but just to be able to participate in the rest of it. I think that's the easiest. If we don't discuss that motion whilst I'm in the room, I'm happy to leave the room for that portion.
We can deal with it that way.
And not seeking to vote on the item at all.
We'll have a vote on that at the council meeting to make that official and to see what your colleagues think, but I can see that potentially working. That concludes declarations of interest. Yes. All right, so basically from here we will deal with the items before us this evening, and first in the order that they have been raised by members of the public gallery. So the first item raised this evening is item 5.2, which is number 48, Aegina Street, Mount Hawthorn, proposed single house. Questions, council members? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through the Mayor, to the Director or Manager. Just in relation to the comment from the public gallery about the option of mirroring the developments, is that something that's been discussed with the applicant at all?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that particular option hasn't been discussed with the applicant on the basis that the proposal before you is what the applicant is seeking approval for in terms of exploring different configurations around lot boundary walls. I suppose they have arrived at this being the proposal that they're after. Now, if there is a willingness and if there's a request to broach that with the applicant, that can be done through administration, but the proposal before you is what the applicant is seeking approval for.
Councillor Loden.
Just following up on the same topic, so is there potential for administration to have a conversation to see if that could be flipped and then the plans amended before the council meeting, or is that unrealistic?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that could be problematic in terms of just thinking this through, the applicant, first of all, better understanding what the implications would be and whether they would be accepting of such a suggestion. They would then need to prepare some amended plans. They would also need to be submitted. Administration needs an opportunity to assess that so that elected members have an assessment against the policy framework. So on that basis, to turn that around within a week, to have that tabled at the council meeting for March, I think that could prove to be problematic.
So realistically, if the applicant was amenable, it would have to be a deferral until the next meeting.
Through you, Mayor Cole, correct. That would be the case if they were amenable. It, of course, is up to the applicant to seek approval for what's before you.
And so administration will have that conversation and report back through the briefing notes. Is that right?
Cole, yes, we can raise that with the applicant.
My other question was just in terms of the front verge area. It was the canopy coverage. It says it's compliant, but I was just curious around if administration is comfortable that they will be able to meet that 30% requirement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in the officer's report, in the comment section, there's discussion on landscaping. So the 30% is a standard within the city's built form policy. It has not been signed off by the state government as of yet, but nonetheless, that administration's had due regard for that provision. The application would propose in the order of 21.5% canopy cover and 17% deep soil planting area. So the 30% would not be possible based on what is being proposed.
Thank you. And looking at the front renders, it looks like there's the potential for space on the opposite side to the existing tree for an additional tree in the verge. Is that an option?
Mayor Cole, it is available to elected members to form the view that the shortfall of canopy cover on site would result in the need to provide additional landscaping, potentially in the verge. So if there is an opportunity to provide that, then that could be explored.
So I guess probably to be more specific, I'm seeking advice on, and I'm happy for this. Maybe I'll phrase it differently. Can I request an amendment to include an additional tree in the verge, but along with that, just some guidance on whether that will fit in the space that's available? It looks like there is, but typically the parks guys like to have a look at that.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can confirm that in the briefing notes. I just wanted to point out that with the development of one of the single houses, it would result in the need to remove an existing verge tree, which is not mature, but there is also a condition recommended for that to be replaced. So that is shown on the development plans.
Thank you. So that would be the one that I've seen on that. There appears to be one basically between the two developments in the Yep. And so I guess what I'm wondering is if there's potential to fit one on the other side of the driveway. And if so, I'd request an amendment to add that in consideration for next week.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can confirm that in the briefing notes.
Councillor Castle. Thank you. Just a follow-up question on the mirroring suggestion that we've had from public statements. If the applicant is amenable to considering that option, and if administration is going to prepare any advice on that, could we also consider whether we're simply switching the issue to the other property, the other side of the property, and can I request some commentary on that, particularly given that both properties have the same applicant and therefore there may not be the same objections that we might see if they were separate owners, just if that has a similar impact on the other side.
Through Mayor Cole, some advice based on the proposal itself and perhaps some of the logic from the applicant is that what would be the northern boundary side of number 48, that is intended to have a setback to provide openings to that northern aspect for their living spaces, which is why the boundary, that longer boundary length is not to that northern boundary. It's also important to note that on the adjoining property to the south, which is number 46, Aegina Street, what that proposed boundary wall would be abutting is a vehicle access point or vehicle access leg, which basically goes into a parking space, which in itself has a boundary wall abutting that. So in terms of the impact, as per the officer's discussion in the report, it would not impact active habitable spaces or outdoor areas. That perhaps is some of the logic as to why the boundary wall is positioned where it is.
Councillors. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. May I just ask a question following on from Mr Wilson's comments in the gallery in relation to the mature tree on the neighbouring property? Mr Wilson's just raised some concerns about the impact of the boundary wall construction on that tree and whether perhaps may be prudent to well, I guess I'll ask the question in relation to does the city have any mechanisms by which we can condition protection of that tree through the building process? Would that be through this process or building permit?
Through Mayor Cole, I'd like an opportunity to perhaps discuss this with my colleagues in terms of the best way to protect that tree and better understand the circumstances. It's not uncommon for development on the boundary and a situation where there may be a tree present on the adjoining property. So I'm certain there would be a solution or a way forward. I also want to note that there is a condition recommended for a construction management plan. Ordinarily, that could include some standards around how to protect existing trees on the adjoining property, but I can confirm the briefing notes.
Councillors. Manager, I just have a question in relation to Mr Wilson's concern about the impact of the boundary wall at number 46. And I'm just reading the report here that says that deemed to comply standard for lot boundary walls to two side boundaries to a maximum height of 3.5 metres and an average height of 3 metres up for up to 2/3 of the lot boundaries behind the front setback. So my reading is that the issue of the two boundary walls is compliant, but there are some minor variations around some of those average heights. Is that just seeking a confirmation on that?
Yes, Mayor Cole, under the city's built form policy, well actually under the R codes, there's some provisions of the R codes that you can vary and amend through a local planning policy. So the city's built form policy establishes under clause 5.2 relating to boundary walls that you can actually have those same standards under the R codes that applies to one lot boundary, but to two. And that is the deemed to comply standard based on the city's built form policy. So you're permitted to, in this circumstance, have two boundary walls to a maximum height of 3.5 metres, an average height of 3 metres, and to a length each of approximately 22 metres for each of those boundary walls. So that is the deemed to comply standard. What you will see in the city's or the officer's commentary and detailed assessment is that it's the average height that is the departure to the deemed to comply standard. So the requirement or the deemed to comply standard is 3 metres, and they're seeking up to 3.2 metres average height. The maximum height would comply.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that based on that question. Also just wanted to ask, in terms of subdivision side by side on a narrow lot, this is something that we have discussed. We've talked about battle axe versus side by side subdivision. Of course, subdivisions are carried out by the WA Planning Commission. I just wanted to ask, what ability do we have to put in place, for example, a minimum width of a lot before we can actually subdivide side by side?
Through Mayor Cole, that's a very good question. Ultimately, under the R codes, there are minimum widths for certain density codes, specifically low density codes. So up to R25, there are minimum widths specified, right up to 8 metres for an R25 lot. Beyond that, and for high density codes, there is no minimum width. So as long as other standards are met under the R codes, such as minimum lot sizes, it would be available to the WA Planning Commission to approve subdivision and lot creation for lots narrower than, or at 7.5 metres as what's before you.
Does the city have any ability to contest that through our local planning scheme or local planning policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we would need to discuss that with the department officers to see what is the best planning instrument to deal with and to regulate lot widths. It may not be best lived in the local planning policy. It may need to be included in the city's planning scheme to influence subdivision approvals, but that would need to be a separate discussion outside of the scope of this application.
Yes, I'm just flagging that would be a useful discussion to have, I think, next time we're looking at updating our scheme. Thank you. I think that was all from me. Any other questions on this application? Okay, I'll take us on to the next one, which is similar, but there are differences that you may wish to raise. So that is item 5.3, number 48A, Aegina Street, Mount Hawthorn, proposed single house. Any questions on this application? Councillor Loden.
Just the same query about the verge tree as the previous one. I think the same thing applies, just in a mirror image effectively of it.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we can consider that and provide advice in the briefing notes.
Any further questions? Okay, thanks, councillors. The next item is 5.7, amendment number 4 to local planning policy number 7.5.15, character retention in heritage areas relating to guidelines for the Boulevard, Kagoli Street, Matlock Street and Buxton Street. Questions, please. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a query on specifically on the Kagoli Street retention. There's some commentary around when the consultation occurred, there was 8 objections and 0 support. Is my understanding the assumption is that we had the 16 people who nominated, then 3 people of that 16, so then decided to object to those updated plans. So we have 13 people supporting and 8 objecting, and that's the justification for it. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, that's correct. So 16 people originally signed the nomination, and then during the advertising period, 3 of those original nominators objected to the proposal.
How confident are we that the other 13 people who sign, because it's effectively a petition they sign, isn't it, are still supportive of the nomination?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't got any evidence to say they are still supportive, other than their original nomination and the fact that they were consulted with and didn't provide an objection changing their view. So, but obviously there's no guarantee that they still support it.
And I mean, the difference between what they would have seen, so the original piece of information they would have seen was just an idea of character retention, which they signed a petition. And then from there, now the character retention policy has been developed and then advertised. So it would seem to be a lot more information for those people that are, the people that are objecting are probably more informed in terms of what there is proposed than those that were in the original submission.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, definitely more informed. They've seen the policy. They've had the city's held workshops, and we had a meeting recently as well. So yeah, a lot more informed than they were when they signed the original nomination.
And I wasn't able to attend the workshop.
And just into that, we did have that attempt to re-engage the street on Monday night. Not last night, but previous Monday. And we didn't have anyone speaking in favour at that meeting either, but we did have those objectors coming along to the meeting.
Okay. is there any way we can get some more information, get an idea of if these 13 people who originally signed it are supportive between now and the meeting?
Through Mayor Cole, we could attempt to contact them again. We have only their postal addresses, however.
I would also add to that we have tried to contact them on a number of occasions, and we've invited them to a workshop at Anzac Cottage, which is in the middle of their section, which is very easy to walk to. And I think you just sort of have to get to a point where you say you've attempted contact on a number of occasions, and then you just have to, say that's probably sufficient.
Yes, if I might just add, so we did send everyone a letter again 2.5 weeks ago. So they all received another letter. Every resident in the street received, an owner in the street received a letter 2.5 weeks ago advising them of this meeting and the meeting next week, and inviting them to that discussion last Monday.
So is it fair to say, aside from the initial signing of the petition, since that point onwards, we haven't had anybody who's been supportive of character retention?
Through Mayor Cole, yeah, in short, that's correct. For Kagoli Street, that's correct. Other than those outside of the nomination area, we've had a number of people supportive, but not residents, owners in that street. Yes.
Just so we don't end up tied up at the meeting next week, can I request an amendment to remove Kagoli Street from the character retention for council to consider for next week, please?
Is that all, Councillor Loden? Yep, okay, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, I guess similar questions, because I believe that since the initial consultations in the lead up to the last council meeting cycle, we've had that residents meeting that I attended, and I believe other council members have received a number of emails in the last few days. And I'm just wondering if we could bring all of that together, particularly those recent emails and the speakers tonight, just so we've got the full picture of who is in support and who's objecting, because it does seem to be swinging a bit like a pendulum. So it would be good to have the most up-to-date picture of where those people are from and what their position is, particularly because I note that some of them were engaged in the initial part of the consultation and have now given their views. So I am interested in some commentary in the briefing notes about how we might proceed if we were to separate out some of these sections and not proceed with all 4 areas at once.
Just to clarify, administration's recommending 3 of the 4, so not Buxton Street, and so we now have a flagging of an amendment on Kagoli Street, but I think that's a really good idea. I'm just wondering if we could potentially add to the table on page 406 to add another column that says comments received since the letters have gone out about the council briefing and council meeting this month.
Yeah, through Mayor Cole, that sounds great. Yep.
Council members, Councillor Hallett.
Through you, Mayor. Has there been any level of follow-up with those submitting objections to ensure that the character retention proposals understood and concerns that may be related to fear of heritage listing or onerous compliance are explained to them?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that's happened through in a few different ways. One was that a community meeting that occurred last week. We've also spoken individually to concerned residents over the phone, and we've also sent some emails, providing some further explanation around concerns raised and clarification where clarification was required. So, that's happened to probably most of the people that have raised concern, either through the submissions or subsequently.
And just under that submission summary table on page 406, it states overall there was only minimal support for streets to be investigated as heritage areas. Is that a typo, or was heritage part of the consultation as well as character retention?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, heritage was one of the questions asked as part of the advertising of the proposal, and we didn't have a huge response, and it was about 50-50 of the number of people that supported versus not supported, but the response rate overall, given the number of people that would be affected, was quite low. I think it was 17, 18 out of the hundreds of properties that would be impacted.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director. Just following on from Councillor Castle's request on being able to get a greater appreciation of all of those fors and against that have come through from the beginning and then including those today. Can I ask that whether we can actually map those, so if we actually have a clear idea of where those properties sit within that area, maybe even a colour coding in some way, just so that we can really have it all together. The tables are really useful, but I think there's so many of the properties that actually relate closer to some parts of the street. So, yeah, I understand what I mean.
I do, through you, Mayor Cole. We can provide that information.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So the line of questioning and the policy that relates to character retention empowers the existing owners and owners in particular with and even to some degree with percentages to be the determinants of the decision making. The commentary, I guess there's a question, the officer recommendation departs from those principles in some way, and it talks to general planning principles. I guess when there is a clear majority one way or another, going to the community is a process of bringing people along for a journey positively or negatively. When it's split and people have, I'm asking a question. Thank you. I guess if we can get some if you go back to the policy itself, it's fairly clear cut that if you get this percentage, it's yes. If you don't get this don't achieve this percentage, it's no. On what basis have the recommendations been made that are outside by the administration that are outside of those numbers? That's a question.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the policy is set up in our reading of it that the nomination is based on achieving a 40% support, minimum threshold. Once that nomination has occurred, it's then a process of developing the provisions, considering whether the street is appropriate or not for character retention, if the character if the character elements are intact and what they are, consulting with the community, and then taking both of those things, so the character elements of the street, the level of intactness, along with the responses from the community, and then recommending a policy for council to proceed or not proceed with. The changes to the level of support aren't, in our view, the only factor once the nomination has triggered the policy development. So that's the reason why administration's recommended proceeding, because we believe that in the case of Kagoli Street, the street is still largely intact. There are heritage or character elements that are important that we think should be retained. And in relation to the level of community support, it has been through the lack of response from the original supporters of the nomination and through lack of response from other residents and owners, we haven't been able to establish whether it is in fact the vast majority of people are against it or not. So that was the reason we landed on the recommendation we did, but I must say it wasn't clear cut at all. So it's very open, and this is a policy of council. Council aren't bound by any of the matters they're bound by when making a decision on a development application. You've got complete discretion to make a decision about whether to proceed or not proceed. So it's very much open to council to change that recommendation. So,
thank you. And I've got a few questions, so specifically about what's recommended or proposed in the policy. So the development objective, I'm talking specifically about, obviously, for these sections that are proposed to be included. The development objectives, the first one is retention and conservation of original dwellings, but under the current scheme as exists under the regulations, anyone can demolish their home and they have to just put in an application, and there is no basis, even if this policy exists, to prevent people from demolishing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. They don't even need to put an application in through Mayor Cole, just a
demolition permit. Sorry, they have to inform you that they're doing it, but they don't have to ask permission to, which means that the elements that are referred to in the policy, so if people have intent to develop new on their lot, I'm talking about renovation, they can demolish what they have, and then the pre-existing character on that lot is irrelevant because it would no longer exist. Is that correct?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's correct.
Okay, so if we look at just going through, so the street setbacks, I'm just looking at what's different from what is otherwise required under our existing planning framework. This looks at specifically must be an average of the two either side, but we currently take the average of the 5 either side in any case. So the streetscape is currently reflected in the existing policy framework. Is that correct?
There is a slight change, but yes, through Mayor Cole, it's very similar.
Okay. The two-storey development to be set back behind the line, that's a proposed significant change from what would otherwise be required currently or elsewhere. Is that correct? The 4 metres behind the predominant ground floor building line, I presume would, in the case of new development, refer to 4 metres behind the average of the other side, or when we talk about predominant ground floor building line, does that look at the streetscape as a whole?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that is a difference between our current built form standards.
The fencing, the building heights is exactly the same as the R code, 7 metres, 10 metres for the wall heights. Is that correct? And our built form policy. The loft additions, that's also the same. That's
through Mayor Cole, that's an addition on top of that's an additional height that's proposed to be permitted through these standards over and above what's in the built form policy.
Resurrection of an old city policy. The garage, etc., that's exactly the same as exists in the current policy. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, there is a change there. So the garage setback is additional to what's in the built form policy. That's my understanding.
So it's 1.5 metres, that's correct. But largely on the streets proposed, they all have rear lane access, which means that, they don't. Okay, that's fine. The requirement for one habitable room is new, is that correct?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's new. Instead of requiring a window, it requires an opening to a habitable room, so not a faux window, if you like.
And the fence heights is a marginal change in what's solid or otherwise, but largely just calling for shorter solid sections of fence, what's currently required under our policy.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, there's a few changes in relation to the fencing to create some flexibility over and above what's in the built form policy, but in essence, it's trying to reflect what's in the street.
And then the general building design, if someone was to seek to build new and was not of a style that reflected the existing character, is it fair to presume that it's under the provisions of general building design that would give, the intent would be to give the city or the decision maker at the time the most ability to be able to contend that contemporary style was not in keeping with the character of the area, because it specifically talks about pitches and about window design, etc. Would that be the design element that would be most particular? It's not setbacks or otherwise, it's actually referring to design elements. Is that a fair summary of what's in Part 7 of the proposed policy?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the main, probably the biggest change that this policy would introduce is the statement of character, which essentially sets out what character new development would need to achieve, and that reflects the character of those streets, or attempts to. And so all development applications would need to align with that character statement. Now, there is the potential for a development to meet all of the deemed to comply standards and therefore be exempt from the need for development approval and therefore would never be assessed against that statement of character. But that is the process that's set out in the R codes and under the state government's local planning regulations. And so there's no avoiding that without creating some probably overly prescriptive and overly restrictive deemed to comply standards. So the statement of character is really the key part of the policy.
Okay, and so, and only as an example, but it was brought up in the public comments earlier, is it fair to presume that the development that was spoken about at number 92 Flinders Street, which was apparently a recently sold property, that a development of that style and nature would not be able to be built within these areas if this policy was to be approved? Would that be, I'm happy for that to be answered during the briefing notes. You'd obviously have to look at what was there, but that specifically, but the setbacks, the window form, the location of the garage, etc. If I can just get some comments in the briefing notes as to whether that style of development would be permissible. And again, there is the discretion. Obviously, policy is not. There's always the discretion to approve, but whether that would be in effect able to be built and be in line with the spirit of what's proposed in the policy.
Through Mayor Cole, we can do an assessment of that proposal and provide that information to show what the assessment would, what the outcome of that assessment would be.
Councillors, any further questions? Director, I just had a couple of questions. It was raised by a member of the public gallery this evening about page 422. It looks to me that that's the table dealing with heritage areas. So not character retention, but heritage areas. And that was a question in the survey around, would you support heritage as opposed to character? So just clarifying that. And also I'm just interested why that actually ended up in the survey. I think it'd be interesting to go back to the original council resolution, because I was under the understanding that we're just looking at character retention in Mount Hawthorn, and that it possibly wouldn't achieve heritage area status even if we asked this question. I'm just seeking some clarification around that.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, those numbers, we'll need to rectify those numbers because clearly there's an addition error at the very least in there. So we'll fix that up, and I'll have a look to understand what was the basis of it being advertised or that question being asked.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to ask whether it's possible to get a list of any other character retention nominations that have come through. I'm aware that Wilberforce Street had a nomination, so I'm particularly interested in the sort of more character areas. I'm aware already of Carr Street, Claver Street, etc. But in the character areas of North Perth and Mount Hawthorn, it'd be interesting to know what nominations have been received and what the status and time frame of those processes are.
No problem.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, thank you very much. We shall move on to the next item raised, which is item 8.8. Thank you for attending. Minutes and motions from the annual general meeting of electors held on the 9th of February 2021. Questions, please. Oh, I have a few questions, so should I go? Who am I asking these questions of?
Which motion?
Well, I have a few questions on a lot of the motions, so I'm happy for them all to be taken on notice though. So should I just sort of go through them? Okay, so first of all, in relation to the questions that were asked on the discontinuance of commercial waste, I just wanted to ask whether we could have further information provided in the response around the city holding landlord details as opposed to business owner details. And there was a question that was asked further to the motion being put forward. I think there were questions that came at the end where we were asked whether the City of Perth could provide the provision of service, and it would be helpful to have that answered in the agenda. And also I had a question around where it says the city's commercial waste database is limited use to the broker to broker commercial arrangements. I just wanted to ask whether we would even be able to use that data and whether we have privacy provisions that would limit us providing that data to third parties. So that was on that motion. In relation...
Through Mayor Cole, we could make a few comments on that. My understanding is that the City of Perth operate a commercial waste service. It's essentially set up to operate within their boundaries. That doesn't stop any commercial operator requesting the City of Perth to do a commercial pickup outside their boundaries, but that would be entirely at their discretion. So I'd say that to the extent that the City of Perth is not looking to expand, they're not in a market expansion phase. They are set up just to provide a City of Perth service, but they would consider any requests that were made if it was just on the other side of their boundary that may be amenable to them, but we couldn't prejudge what that decision would be. It would probably be on a case-by-case basis. If it was in and around Northbridge, the city's commercial waste database, it's because we hadn't set it up on a commercial basis. It isn't set up as a customer directory. It really is an historic ratepayer and landlord database. So it's not in a form to package up and to pass on to another commercial operator, because that wasn't how the city had set up its initial service in the first place.
I'm happy for these questions to be taken on notice largely because they are really requests for whether this information could be contained in the report. Just in relation to City of Perth, I think it's also worth highlighting that that's an additional paid service and it's not included within the rates. Okay. In relation to the motion on independent review of parking development policies, it would be, could we have some additional information in this response that actually looks at the review of some of the policies that we will be undertaking in planning? For example, review of our parking policy, which would be resulting from state regulation changes which are due to come, I think, mid-2021. I think there's questions here that haven't particularly been addressed around whether we're technically complying with planning policies, and I think the manager raised an issue this evening around the fact that we have our landscaping provisions but they haven't been endorsed by the WAPC, and what do we need to do to get that endorsement, and what's the plan in that regards. So there's been specific questions around use of percent for art funds for purposes other than on properties in which the fees are imposed, parking contributions where parking is not provided within 200 metres of the development site, or measurements for assessment of power or water saving. So I think there's a desire to get some responses on those planning requirements and whether we have the planning framework is in place to allow us to require those things. And if we could also have a list of relevant planning policies that will be reviewed that are currently under review or that will be reviewed in 2021-22. In relation to advising landholders to remove catches from their mowers and leave lawn clippings in situ. I understand the request is to advise, but what power does the city have to, to provide? I mean, we can provide advice, but we couldn't. I think that we just sort of need to deal with can we advise or can we require? And I think that's an important point that I'd like to see included in the report. And also, given that we have our native plant sale coming up and it is a sustainability fair, what sort of stalls will we have available that can actually talk to residents about more organic treatments in their gardens and potentially factor this in? In relation to the motion 6 on the lanes being transferred from the City of Vincent to the state government. I don't know if I've missed something, but I wasn't really aware that we were transferring lanes that were in ownership of the City of Vincent to the state government. And I just wanted to ask what, does that have any implications for maintenance of those laneways? Who would be responsible for re-asphalting, drainage, curbing, etc.? In relation to Hyde Park, there have been further questions this evening about a plan for Hyde Park and a group of residents coming together in 2003 to discuss Hyde Park, and also a query around whether species that were planted are no longer being planted. So it'd be useful to have some more background on those issues. And in relation to underground power, the history of underground power in Vincent hasn't included the Bookman-Moyer project, which was the last time the city secured SUP funding, and what happened there. I just wanted to also query the process moving forward. The report talks about us investigating this during the draft asset management and sustainability strategy. Given it's not really discussed at length in that strategy document, I just wanted to raise whether we could have a process to actually address underground power coming out of that. If we ask some questions in the asset management strategy, but then perhaps have a potential deeper discussion with a community panel that we would have set up for this purpose. Also, the response doesn't talk about the investigation into bundled cabling that we had requested the administration undertake. And I would also just like to flag that this item be potentially listed next time that we undertake our corporate business plan review. So I'll seek administration's view on that and then potentially flag an amendment. Okay, I think that was all. Any further questions, Councillor Toppleberg?
Thank you. Just in relation to the response to motion 7, which is the one relating to Hyde Park. Couple of queries. First of all, the administration's response to the request for a master plan, and the timing is clear, but the working group request or otherwise, and don't need to comment immediately, I'm happy to come back through the briefing notes, but if that was the view of council or the community that those two things were mutually exclusive, and given that in the next 4 to 7 years there will be a master plan, I guess the question is, would it be prudent to look at some sort of structure of involving the community through a working group, Friends of Hyde Park or otherwise, or something similar, with clear guidelines as to what decision-making role that group does and does not have? Second question is the ATCO gas response, which is they never let us. Did we ask them? And if not, can we? Because I note that whilst the infrastructure is there, the bollards that are painted yellow around it may not necessarily be as sacred to them as their actual infrastructure. So can we ask them, please, if we didn't? I guess the acceptance of the Heritage Council of the appropriateness of the gravel as a physical treatment doesn't necessarily answer doesn't respond to the sentiment, I suppose, of the movers of the motion or the speakers to it in relation to not so much as much the visual element, but also the invitingness to sit in shady areas. And my question is whether there are alternatives to gravel to be able to provide the ability to have something that is low on the, well, it fits environmentally and certainly with water usage, but is able to still be inviting for people who want to sit in. It's a good one, isn't it? You like that? Shady spots. There you go. To be able to sit in shady spots within the park. There you go. Glad that's been recorded for perpetuity. So whether I mean, currently it's become a gravel versus grass discussion. Just the question is, what are other options available in the horticultural spectrum that may suit both needs? Thank you.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to the underground power. There's a commentary in relation to the city being open to other SUP applications SUP processes. And I just wanted to get some more understanding if the city is open to that, what would the mechanism be for identifying suitable areas that may be included? I do believe I've heard that Commonwealth Avenue is supportive of underground power, but I think I know that informally, and so would just be interested to know if there is, in the absence of a particular policy, if there is any mechanism for gathering that information and progressing identification and prioritisation of SUP potential projects. And then the other one was just something I had noticed in the minutes was that I believe it possibly was Mary Gray and not Mari Slive that made the comment about the aerators, that it was Mary. So if we could just have a look at the minutes to ensure that that is correctly identifies the person that made the comments. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
Just related to motion 9 about the city's code of conduct, just wondering, in the response, it mostly just refers to the new code and the state one being incorporated, but there doesn't seem to be any response to the commentary or the parts of the motion around the removal of parts of the code of conduct. And just wondering if that could be commented on in the briefing notes.
Councillor Wallace, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Meko. It's just regarding motion 7 around Hyde Park. Parts of the original motion were concerned with water quality and environmental health out at the park. And in the response, it was noted that there's been a couple of measures being taken to improve water quality in the park, including introduction of the treatment train, and we have an ongoing monitoring and testing program. I was just wondering if the city could provide a little bit more information on that. I think going back to 2008, the park was classified as a contaminated site. And as part of that original classification, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation said that the park in its current state posed an unacceptable risk to human and environmental health. The response noted that there were no alarming trends. I was just wondering if we could get some further information relating current water quality and sediment quality out there to applicable human and environmental health guidelines, whether we're still above those or whether the measures that we've taken have managed to improve them to an extent that this risk is no longer present. And if that is the case, is the city progressing with reclassification of the site as remediated? Thank you. Did you get all that, Wendy?
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Any further questions on the AGME? Okay. Oh, yes, we do.
Just requesting a very minor amendment to the minutes. There's a note there that I was listed as an apology and that retrospective leave of absence was granted, but that had actually been approved at the December meeting. So I'm just wondering if the minutes can be updated to reflect that. Thank you.
Yes, that's apologies for that. Councillor Hallett.
From memory also, there was no apology for Councillor Toppleberg in there, but or he was put as an apology, but he was actually in the room, albeit not at the council table.
Just to be clear, the presence as an elector at the annual general meeting of electors has nothing to do with being present as an elected member. I was happily there as a member of the community.
We understand. You don't have to sit in your seat with your name tag. It's fine. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. I'm just saying Yep, go ahead.
I just want to clarify just one point. It's back to page 7 with regards to motion 7. I just wanted to get a correction when it comes to the outbreak that we've had of avian botulism in the park, and we did have one last year. I remember it distinctly, and I've just called it up. April last year during COVID. So, can we get a correction and just whether I'm wrong, but just get a clarification when we use the term many years. We've had a number of outbreaks of that issue, and make sure that we're clear when we're responding to members of the community on those issues.
Are we moving on now? Yep. Okay. Next item is 5.4, which is number 104 Eaton Street, North Perth, proposed alterations and additions to single house carport. Questions? Councillor Toppleberg.
Thank you. The image that's shown from the street that's been provided it shows a double garage with effectively a single crossover. There was some discussion from the applicant's representative about concerns about, I think that they said that in their consideration of a narrower version that there would be issues in accessing the right-hand side, but the image that's been provided, I don't know if that's just that they haven't updated the, so I'll just get it open so I can get a page number for you. So it is on page 344, the crossover. It appears as though in order to get into the right-hand side of the carport, you'd be driving across the grass and the verge. Is that as proposed, and they just haven't properly drawn what's proposed, or is the crossover supposed to be the full width of the proposed garage, carport?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is accurate, what has been portrayed in that perspective, and it's also consistent with the actual development plans on page 340. So there's an existing single width crossover on site, which is about 2.8 metres. They're proposing to increase that to 3.7 metres in terms of that crossover. That approval process sits outside of the DA process. It's approved separately by engineering team in terms of the crossover because it's within city managed land. But nonetheless, they are intending to expand it to 3.7 metres. But as you can see, that would require particularly a driver trying to get into the southernmost bay to drive across the footpath and a portion of the verge.
Okay. And is the, sorry, okay, I suppose it's open to me to do so, but I guess that's not listed currently as a reason for refusal, that the design that's proposed would require driving over what is a vegetated verge, or most likely because you wouldn't be able to, if you look at the development plans as they stand, it wouldn't be possible, certainly if there was a vehicle parked on the left, you wouldn't be able to turn at such a way to avoid driving over the vegetated verge, is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, it's covered off in refusal reason number 2. Refusal reason number 2 relates to the R-code's provisions around manoeuvrability and safe in use parking spaces. Head of power is the Australian standards.
I guess, yeah, okay, so if beyond the Australian standard we say we like our green verges and we don't want people having to drive over them, that's available to us to include that as a reason for refusal. Okay, thank you. And in the event that Council was of a view to disagree with the officer's recommendation to approve it, would it be fair to assume that the applicant would be then, it would be open to the applicant to then go to engineering and say, now I've got my double garage, I need a double crossover to be able to service it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it would be available to the applicant. I'll take that on notice in terms of what engineers would advise in that scenario, but I can provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. And just confirming, sorry, that this is a corner lot with access to the rear from the adjoining street.
Yes, but there's no right of way, but because it's a corner lot, it has the access, yes. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. And to the manager, just a quick question in relation to the applicant's comment that administration have advised that a 4 metre wide carport would be approvable. Just to clarification on whether a 4 metre wide carport would be considered compliant or it would meet the, I guess, principles and be approved that way.
Through you, Mayor Cole, a 4 metre wide carport would still be problematic because the principal issue at play is the introduction of building mass in the front setback area in what is a established streetscape with open frontages. The contemplation of 4 metre wide carports really came about as part of the referral of the application as well to our design review panel for feedback. And there's some commentary on page 334 of the agenda, which captures some of the DRP comments, and basically it's in line with administration's view that it is not appropriate. Now, the DRP have then gone on to say that by decreasing the width to 4 metres, it still wouldn't be supported, but it would be more acceptable. So that's perhaps where the applicant's reference to 4 metres has arisen.
Manager, just to be clear, the applicant is not interested in maintaining a single crossover with a single carport?
Yes, Mayor Cole, as you heard tonight, there's reasons why they're seeking a double carport, yep. So that's what they're after.
And just also to seek clarification, do they currently have a single garage?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, they do have a single garage.
Okay. And just wanted to ask, it says in the deemed to comply assessment that it has a, where is it? The carport is proposed to be built up to the northern lot boundary, but the plans look like there is actually a bit of a setback. I'm not sure if I'm misreading the plans.
Through you, Mayor Cole, under the R codes, any structure within 0.6 metres from a lot boundary is deemed to be a boundary wall for the purpose of assessment. So that's the reason why it's treated as a boundary wall.
Okay. And just in relation to the recent changes to the R codes allowing for carports in front setback areas, has that had any impact whatsoever in this application?
No, Mayor Cole, the R codes interim changes that I'm assuming you're referring to, they take effect mid this year and they don't have any bearing on the assessment of this application at this stage.
If the applicant was to hold off on the application until those R code changes came through, what would the implication be for this application?
Perhaps I'll take that on notice, Mayor Cole, and see if we can do a scan through and see if there would be any changes in terms of the acceptability.
Yep, thanks. Okay, any further questions on the carport? Okay, well, there were the items raised by members of the public gallery this evening, so we'll go back to the beginning of the agenda and go to the items we haven't yet asked questions on. So item 5.1 is 38 Summer Street, East Perth, proposed office. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Is there scope for additional tree planting in the verge once the crossover is removed? And also, could the site be part of Adopt a Verge to maximise landscaping?
Through you, Mayor Cole, potentially I will confirm in the briefing notes.
Also, just in the report, it stated the built form policy does not provide acceptable outcomes in relation to universal design. Can you just explain that a bit further about what's missing?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that reference is just a capture of the policy setting where there are quite often there are acceptable outcomes. There are just nil in terms of our policy. It's purely a performance-based assessment. So on that basis, that's the assessment that's been undertaken. So there is no way to satisfy the acceptable outcome or deemed to comply because there are none. It's purely a performance-based assessment, and there's some commentary in the officer's report around the width of corridors and also the grade of the ground floor as well, and the ability or the inclusion of a lift to support people with limited mobility.
Councillor Kondrashevsky.
Can I just get a little bit of clarification in relation to the change in zoning for this property from transit corridor to residential, etc., and whether that is just to confirm that there doesn't appear to have been any rationale for the change and administration's view on that and its appropriateness.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we tried to capture just the facts around the changes and when they occurred. In terms of the change itself, it ultimately doesn't change the building height, irrespective of whether it was transit corridor in previous iteration of the built form policy versus through the amendment, because it still remained as 2 stories. In terms of the built form area, however, I suppose that is something that administration would need to consider as part of a future review of the policy itself. My understanding is that it was intended to be transit corridor. However, there was some misalignment with the lot boundaries, and in a number of changes, it was changed to residential, seemingly without any supporting commentary. So on that basis, it's probably something that needs to be reviewed, not only the built form area, but also perhaps the building height.
Can I just add to that, because that was really my fundamental question. So the planning framework is a bit odd around this, and that does result in a high number of variations. Can we just have some advice about what the future planning direction for this area should be if we're coming back to reviewing the built form policy again? What advice would administration give us on this area, separate to this particular DA? But I think that might, given that sort of strange history, that may need to be presented to council.
Yes, Mayor Cole, we can confirm that in the briefing notes. What is set out in the officer's report is that this particular site is adjacent to a number of urban growth areas as identified in the city's planning strategy. So we've got the East Perth Power Station directly to the south. You've also, further to the west, you have the Claysbrook future mixed use development area as well. Currently, there's concrete batching plants in that space. And also you've got this transit corridor along East Parade. So I guess in terms of activity and intensity, it's definitely intended to be a genuine mixed use and vibrant area, and significant increase in terms of intensification. This particular block of commercially zoned lots, however, are still zoned commercial and also of a 2-story building height, which could seem at odds with the broader context. So that's a snapshot in terms of the planning framework as it stands, but I can provide more information in the briefing notes.
Thank you, Manager. Councillor Wallace. I'm sorry, Councillor Loden, you did have a question as well, so I haven't forgotten yours. Come to you after Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Nicole. Just regarding the environmentally sustainable design, I think we asked for 5 and the applicants proposed 4. The reasons for proposing 4 said due to geometric and financial constraints. Is this applicant able to provide any more details regarding what the geometric constraints are or what they're referring to there?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the geometric constraints reference is in relation to the orientation of the site being north-south, as well as the lot size itself not being in a size where you could potentially incorporate greater energy efficiencies. those are the two geometric constraints that they're referring to. In terms of the financial constraint, I think they're making reference to the budget for this type of, or this scale of development.
Might be a long shot. Are you able to provide any estimate about what the cost would be to get this building from a 4 to 5? I went through the Green Star system, which I'm not particularly familiar with. There seem to be a lot of items grayed out that I would think would be relevant, including many around building materials to this particular development. And a few other things. I'd be very interested in any information you have around what the cost of implementing those would be.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I can seek a response from the applicant.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess probably following on from the question around the Green Star, I note on the plans the solar array on the roof is got a little brackets of TBC behind it. So I just wanted to clarify, if that says TBC, does that mean that it won't it might not be on the final plans? And if it is removed, what impact that would have on the star rating of the building?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can clarify the TBC reference. I think separate but relating to this, administration, following on from briefing, will be seeking to include an additional condition in its recommendation, specific to ensuring that they deliver on the 4-star rating and the measures that have been identified in the report, on the basis that this is a commercial building and that is a deemed to comply standard. So that is something that should be secured. In terms of the solar array and its delivery, that forms part of the 4-star rating. So on that basis, it would need to be provided should this be approved and should that condition be supported.
Thanks. Then just to continue on from Councillor Hallett's questions around the landscaping, in the interest of time, can I request an amendment to require 2 additional verge trees to be planted? And Jeremy can give me some justification for why 2's not going to fit, maybe through the briefing notes.
Yes, that can be arranged, Councillor Odom.
Councillors. Okay, moving on to item 5.5, Community Sporting and Recreation Facilities Fund Small Grants Application for Forest Park Croquet Club. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand that the City coordinates the applications from our local clubs, and just wondering if admin considers it odd that we only have 1 application, and what have the application numbers and success rates been in previous rounds?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it's not unusual for us to receive a small number or no proposals. The clubs are required to fund 1/3 as part of that grant proposal. So it's quite a challenge for clubs to come up with that kind of funding for upgrades and for renewal works that they want to see occur early. So it's not unusual, but I can certainly provide you with some information around historic applications.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director, do we know, out of the current 72 members, do we know what portion of those members are residents or ratepayers for the City of Vincent?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we do know that, but I don't have those numbers in front of me, sorry. I can provide those in the briefing notes.
Councillors. Okay, moving on to item 5.6, amendment number 6 to local planning scheme number 2 and amendment number 1 to local planning policy number 7.4.5, temporary accommodation. Councillor Hallett.
If Council is in mind to approve the alternate policy, can I just find out if we received an application that had a compelling justification for not including a minimum 2-night stay? Does the policy allow Council to have discretion on that?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it does.
And if we approve the one that doesn't have the minimum night stay, and Council is of the mind to apply that minimum as an additional condition, how would that stand up under appeal?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we would have to have a a sound planning reason to impose that condition, but it could absolutely be done.
Just possibly foreshadowing some minor tweaks to the possible amendment, just in relation to the notification of management plan and code of conduct to the city in the circumstances where it's for the single use, not the exemption from having a code of conduct, but the exemption from perhaps actually having to send it to the city. And then also some potential consideration in relation to that maximum one rental on one occasion in terms of town centre. But I will endeavour to get that done maybe tonight, for next week. And thank you for administration for assistance in preparing what I've got to so far.
Councillors? I think I'm kind of on alignment, but I was thinking also if we're talking amendments, just flagging return of the 2-night minimum stay where it's unhosted, so only for holiday accommodation and holiday houses, not for bed and breakfast because they're hosted, or not for holiday house or holiday accommodation where they are hosted. And also just I'm trying to find a table, but where we talked about maintaining one stay only up to 3 months, foreshadowing an amendment that would be in residential and mixed use areas only, and that there could be more flexibility in local centres, district centres, town centres to allow for no limit on bookings, but a maximum of 3 months a year, so that you could have multiple bookings for 3 months of the year, but it would be that same requirement that it's maximum of 3 months per year, and then anything above that would require planning approval. So I'm not sure. Are we sort of vaguely? We can, you can do your amendments, and I'll see if I need to do further amendments. Okay. Anything else? Councillor Fotakis.
Just that, a question about a proposed amendment to an amendment. But when we've got, I suppose, situations like that where you've got multiple instances fitting in with a particular term, have we got the ability to police that, and how would we?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if there were multiple rentals permitted as part of an exemption, we would obviously have to have evidence of each of those rentals. Now that can occur in a number of different ways, but the best way is for us to be there and to actually view each of those breaches. There are other ways, but they're more difficult. Ultimately, I think pragmatically what would happen is that we would engage with the operator. This is what happens 99% of the time. They usually don't know that they needed approval or that they were doing something wrong. We advise them, they rectify, and they operate it in accordance with the exemption, or they seek to get an approval and they go through the process and then they operate in accordance with the approval. That's, like I said, 99% of the time that's what happens. So I think practically it's important to have those provisions there so that subsequently, once an issue arises, it's resolved.
Any further questions? Okay, moving on to item 8.1, which is going to be rebranded 9.8 at the next meeting. The City of Vincent Rebound Plan Quarterly Update. Any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett? It's also listed as 8.8 if that's caused you confusion.
Just wondering if the city's identified any unidentified...
Sorry, 8.1. My apologies. Sorry, Councillor Hallett.
No worries. Through you, Mayor, has the city identified any unintended consequences of the relaxation of development processes, either the state government's response or through ours?
Through Mayor Cole, could you repeat that question, Councillor Hallett? My apologies.
No worries. Has the city identified any unintended consequences, negative ones, of the relaxation of development processes, either from the ones that we've done or through the state government's response?
Oh, through Mayor Cole, that's a difficult question. I'm not aware of any, but what I'll do is I'll go back and we'll go through any concerns that we've received, and I'll speak to the team and we'll provide that in the briefing notes.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it might be fair to say the changes didn't lead to a huge flood of new or different developments. So the potential applicants who use those exemptions, I think they're of quite a small number and small scale.
Councillors, questions? I just wanted to ask questions about event funding. For the next event funding EOI, I just wondered what period that's going to be for and whether we're engaging with our town teams about their preparedness to start running events. And I had also just heard that the Leederville Laneway opening was afoot and that was potentially being managed through ABN, and I wondered whether there'd been any discussion about making that a community event, given that we have a laneway that's owned by the People's Republic of Vincent.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we certainly have been engaging with the town teams around events, and we have been in discussions around the Leederville Laneway and making sure that those events are open to the community. Absolutely.
And so the question about the next EOI and for what period that will cover, is that for the next events EOI? Yep.
Yeah, Mayor Cole, the events EOI has been published and that is for the next financial year. However, we're still receiving applications in real time from community groups and town centres through to the end of the financial year, and we've made financial provision for that.
Fantastic, thank you. Any further questions on rebound? No, okay. Moving along then to infrastructure and environment items, 6.1, tender number, do I have to read it out? I should probably for the record. Tender number IE 105 2020, design, supply and install solar photovoltaic systems at the City of Vincent sites.
I've got a question, but it relates to the confidential attachment. So if it's okay with you, Mayor Cole, when we move to the end of the meeting, I'll ask the question of the Director.
No problem. Any other questions, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. I also have some questions under the confidential section, but on the non-confidential bit, I was just curious. So this has tenders out to 2020, but is there more opportunities the city is assessing for after that period? Or have we reached the end of our economic list of solar opportunities?
Through my call, I'll take that on notice and we'll add some information to the briefing notes.
My second question was just around the state government's low interest loans that are available, and if that was considered as an option to fund these, given that they have a payback that could pay back that debt over time.
Through Mayor Cole, we can confirm that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, Councillor Kondrashevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question in relation to Perth Soccer Club. They're not on the list here, but there was previous discussions in relation to solar panels for that group and a mechanism potentially that they would do a self-supporting loan or something, and whether that's still coming forward or whether the idea of solar panels for that club has disappeared.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, that's it's outside the scope of that particular tender, but I will find an update for you and I'll put that in the briefing notes.
Councillors? Councillor Hallett?
Is it possible to see the estimated financial benefit to the city included in the table of sites, or otherwise in the briefing notes, assuming that given that was part of the decision making around the ranking, and not too onerous?
Yes, McCall, we'll add that if we've got it.
Can I just add a question further to that? My understanding was that we were looking at solar PV on sites where there was payback to the city. I think it would be useful to identify where there will be payback to the city as opposed to going to other groups that would be paying power bills. And if that is the case, that we're paying for the panels and that benefit is going to the third parties such as Bethany or Leederville Cricket Club or Loftus Recreation Centre, which is a proprietary limited company. What is the options for the city to have some of that coming back to the city if we're funding it, or are we looking at contributions? Are we looking at the lessee or the community group having a lease renegotiation around, cost of power being factored in? Are we still looking at a 0% loan scheme for community groups? I just think we do need to understand how that's going to work, where the city is potentially installing solar PV but not getting the payback coming to the city. So first of all, identifying where that is the case, and secondly, are we looking at these mechanisms for contributions, low-cost loan repayments, or lease or renegotiations?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll make sure that we cover those points that you've just mentioned.
Thanks. Any Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a further question on the with the solar panels that we've selected, is there the ability to retrofit a battery onto them in future years?
Mayor Cole, I believe so, but I'll check that with the sustainability team and put that in the notes.
Councillors? Councillor Vatakis?
I just had a question for you, Mayor. I just got my numberings with the previous item with a rebound plan. I do have a question, but whether I can ask that before we move on to the next one.
Maybe if we just finish solar panels and then I'll come back to that. Any further questions on solar panels? No? Okay. It's not one you can ask.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
By email? No?
No, it's just very, very quickly. It's just with regards to an update on the funding for the COVID arts relief, if we can get a clear indication in the report of what's been completed, what's in trial and in the very short term, just so other councillors have an appreciation of that, maybe even a percentage of that, $151,000, and where we're at with that. Thank you.
Yep. Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to provide that detail.
Thank you. Okay, item 6.2, Waste Strategy Project 2, Bulk Hard Waste Options Appraisal Community Consultation Results and Next Steps. Councillor Toppleberg.
Thank you. Question to the CEO, if I may. The report says the estimated cost of the trial for the year will be $245,000, which is very close to the compulsory tender. Can I just ask, in relation to the service, where there's no commentary about, well, what are the provisions for a trial and what are the requirements either under the Act or under our procurement policy to seek other quotes from similar services, and if that's been done, if that information can be contained in the report, and if not, why not, please?
Through Mayor Cole, we've confirmed that if the service has been provided by another local government, in this case a regional council, we can contract directly the WMRC for this underneath that threshold.
So just confirm, if it was $251,000, then we would need to go to tender regardless?
Through Mayor Cole, no.
Okay. Did we seek any other quotes, or are there any, given as a ratepayer and representative of ratepayers, my curious question would be, are these the only people that provide this service? If it's possible to if we didn't seek any other quotes, can we get an explanation? I know it's quite a bespoke service and tailored to local government in particular, so that may well be the answer. But if we could get an indication of whether there anything else was considered, and if that is not being recommended, why, that would be great. Thank you.
So through my call, I'm able to answer this. So the waste team is very aware of market rates. So what we did was we looked at what WMRC were offering. We actually negotiated some of the rates down. So to get to that figure, we looked at some of the rates and said, well, we don't think that's a good market rate. So we did negotiate some of the figures down, and the team are comfortable that it does represent good value for money. So without going to the market, we do know market rates. And so we've done a market assessment of the value.
Okay, I guess as a decision maker, we're asked to spend $250,000 of ratepayers' money, and we've just been told, trust us, we know the market. My request is that if we do go to the market and at least ask a provider of waste services what they would charge, it's not overly complex. It's literally on demand, picking up from people's verges with an estimated volume. Otherwise, we wouldn't have come to that amount. I would imagine that there'd be someone who could provide us with our current service provider, for example, knows what it's like to drive our streets and pick up that rubbish if it was just on demand, as opposed to during a particular period in zones. They would be able to at least give us some response. I think that would be a fair market test to at least be able to satisfy ourselves that we've at least asked the market that question.
So through my colleague, in a way we've done that because we know market rates. As I said, if you wanted to go to market in a more formal way, then we'd obviously have to write a spec. It wouldn't be as simple as it seems. We'd have to do some work, and it would take some time.
Perhaps some additional wording could be included within the report in relation to the technical assessment on the value for money proposition of the trial itself. That may be useful. Just a request in relation to the wording on the recommendation. Currently, it's not particularly prescriptive. On page 10, I believe the last page of the report, it says it is recommended that the City of Vincent participate in the WMRC Verge Valet system on an 18-month trial basis commencing from January 22, and just whether it would be considered that more specific wording might be appropriate, or foreshadowing an amendment as such, just so that the recommendation is quite clear on what is being proposed and the vendor that is being approached, and perhaps whether if the costings that have been provided are robust enough to include, whether that also could be considered for inclusion in the recommendation as well.
Yes, we'll look at that, and we can add some more specific information in the recommendation before next week.
Can I just add to that? I think if that's a decision that's recommended, it would be helpful if that's the case, if we're satisfied with that costing, given that it will then help with communicating that particular service to the community so they know exactly what it is that they are getting. Just in relation to the costings, so the traditional bulk verge collection, $230,000, and the estimated cost per annum for the trial is $245,000. So am I correct in thinking that this service will cost roughly $15,000 more than the current bulk service?
Yeah, so my call here, when you compare an annual cost, it's very similar. You're right, this is a small difference of about 15,000. You can see that what we're proposing is to budget 50% of the cost next year, because it won't be a full year.
Yeah. So can I just ask then, did we not have an allowance in the long-term financial plan for bulk waste collection?
Through my call, yeah, we do.
So it's not that we're not adding, so when it talks about an additional, so I'm just trying to work out, because it talks about we will include an additional $122,500 in the draft budget for 21-22 and $245,000 in the long-term financial plan. But I would have thought that we already had provisioning for bulk hard waste, and that I'm just querying whether we need to allocate just the difference or the full amount.
Yes, so through my call. So for next financial year, we would need to allocate an additional amount, because we're proposing to do one final traditional service at the cost of put the figure 240, and then 6 months worth of a trial, which is an additional cost of 122. Then the year after, it would just be, we would alter the figure because of the different service.
We potentially look at that being an additional $15,000 in the long-term financial plan instead of the full amount, just on page 9. I'm just querying whether that is really just saying if we've already allocated funding in the long-term financial plan for bulk waste, should we just be allocating the difference in the cost of this service versus what we had forecast?
Yeah, so again, Michael, so I think we're saying an additional 120,000
Yeah, I get that bit, yep. Because I see what you're saying, you're overlapping. You're offering two things in the one financial year.
And we could put a full stop there and we say, we could clarify the 245 is $15,000 more than would currently be allocated.
Yeah.
So that's not a problem.
Yeah, that would be helpful, thank you.
Sorry, Michael, I understand the point. I know what you're trying to say.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to ask, given that this is a trial, we don't want to sort of be caught out like we did with the Walcott and Beaufort Strait intersection where we sort of, we sort of forgot that we were having a trial. Would administration feel comfortable considering a further clause, or would they prefer that I potentially put forward an amendment, just saying at the end of the trial, there'll be a further report back to council on the success or otherwise or community's perspective. So I'm assuming that as part of this, we would, given it's a trial, that we would have some kind of survey of community members before the trial ends, just to get that feedback to see whether we do continue with this service and whether that could be referenced in the recommendation.
So, Michael, I think recommendation 4 is about that review report. So we'll prepare a further report on the progress of the trial. And then in the body of the report, we do talk about customer surveys being part of the information that we'll gather throughout the trial. Also things like tonnage, etc., what we're actually collecting and take up with the service.
Perhaps just, I'm happy to sort of flag an amendment just to say on the progress and community feedback on.
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but I think that it's just formalising a request that we will actually have a survey of community. But I do understand that.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably would have happened. Councillor Toppleberg.
The report's not specific on the length of time between booking and collection. The 245, so if council was of a view that should be 24 hours, 24 days, weeks, whatever it may be, are we able to specify what we think would be the reasonable period between, I suppose, what would be an unacceptable period of people having junk out the front of their home?
So through Michael, so if I understand the point Councillor Toppleberg's trying to raise, if you were to try and book a slot, then the WMRC would say the next available slot. So if they would have
so my understanding from the presentation we had to the council workshop was that we can control that, and if we say we want it to be, so there's the booking, but then also the time period between rubbish being the goods to be collected being placed on the verge. If we are of a view that we want to be specific about that, does that have an impact on the cost?
Through my call, yeah, I understand. No, it doesn't. So quite simply, somebody books next Wednesday, we say you can't put the rubbish out till Tuesday night or Monday morning or whatever you prefer. And it's pretty normal to give a resident 24 to 48 hours to put that rubbish out.
So if we want to be specific about that so that the decision during the trial, because if someone books 2 weeks in advance and puts their waste out for 2 weeks, we want to have the ability for that to be included in as a provision of the trial. It would be most appropriate to do it via amendment to the decision to go to trial. Is that correct? If we had a specific request?
Yeah, through my call, yeah, we can specify to a resident, so it wouldn't affect WMRC. They would just book a slot on the day that they had a slot, and then it would be up to us to specify when the resident could put that waste out. So as I said, typically it's 24 to 48 hours because we do not want it out 2 weeks. Yeah, it defeats the object of making the service change, I think. So I understand that. Yeah, if council had I think the waste team would say no more than 48 hours, but if council had something shorter than that, then we can discuss that with WMRC and it won't be a problem.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Wallace?
Thanks, Michael. I just wanted to revisit the requirement for seeking alternative tenders. I thought under the purchasing policy that we'd asked, even if they were a pre-approved supplier, that we still needed to seek a minimum of 3 for a tender of this size. Is the provider here pre-qualified, or are they some different level of provider?
So my colleague, the comment in the report has come from the procurement team. So we've actually asked them to prepare that comment. So I'm trying to find it now. And what it essentially says is we can use the services of another local government without going out to tender. I appreciate that there's the usual ways to call a tender for something of this value, but I suppose the suggestion is we could get this off the ground. Let's go back to the workshop. I think WMRC is saying they have certain capacity. If we take too long, they might not be able to service us. We might miss the chance of a trial if we took too long in trying to find or go to tender. So that's definitely an issue. And for the purposes of an 18-month tender, an 18-month trial, you'd have to question how many other providers would be prepared to do something for, which isn't guaranteed, if that makes sense. There's quite a lot of work in setting up a service. So WMRC are essentially up and running and have capacity to service us is what they're telling us. So we have a sort of an opportunity to go with that. Although I understand the point about not avoiding, but doing procurement in a different way.
So can I just ask, further to that included in whether in the information that would be sought under recommendation 4, given that it gives us 18 months from the end of the year, that market information is garnered in some way over that time, so that when there's a decision to potentially continue with it, we're aware that there may be other providers, and the trial is one thing, but going forward with a potentially permanent solution, I think it would be reasonable for the community to expect to have some sort of market analysis presented.
Through my call, and I know the waste team would want to do that anyway, so absolutely we wouldn't object to that. They're very careful with the city's money.
Further questions? Director, I just wondered whether the WMRC would have any documentation on Verge Valet that we might be able to include as an attachment to the report. That's if that would be possible, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, through my call, we can. The presentation they gave us had some confidential information in about market rates, but we can certainly put some additional information together and attach it. So that or insert it in the body of the report. That won't be a problem.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you. Item 6.3, e-permit implementation update. Director, do you know when that report will be available?
Yes, through my call, because of the tight turnaround since last council, when there was a resolution to provide another update, we be taking it straight to council. That's why I didn't make briefing. So it'll be published on, I imagine, the end of this week when the council agenda gets published. It won't be any later than that.
Okay, so we're looking at Friday. Yep, okay. Okay, moving on to community and business services. Item 7.1, management agreement, Leederville Toy Library, portion of lot 1092799 Loftus Street, Leederville. Any questions? Okay. 7.2, adoption of community funding policy, student citizenship awards. Any questions? Could I just either seek administration's feedback or flag an amendment? And it's such a minor thing, but I think it would probably be more practical in operating, where it says in the in this policy that we would provide a gift of $100. It says $100 worth of gifts in a form of a book voucher, a $50 book voucher, and a framed certificate. Just for the sake of flexibility, I was interested in changing that to $100 worth of gifts in the form of a book voucher and a certificate, so there can be some flexibility. Framed certificate in a nice folder. I just think that it might be
I'm happy to make that amendment. I think that was sort of our intention, was that we were trying to have a nice frame, a nice certificate and a nice gift. So that sounds quite reasonable.
Okay. I am an advocate for a nicer frame, because I have actually had the experience of pulling one out of a bag and it kind of falling apart. And you're trying to hold it together and squeeze it back in and close it whilst handing it to a child. So we do have to have a certain level of quality. Thank you, Director. Much appreciated. Okay, any other questions on this policy? Okay. Item 7.3, investment report as at 31st of January 2021. Just quickly, Director, it's my understanding that we've maxed out our investments with ME Bank. Is that correct? That's the only bank that seems to be offering divestment at the moment.
Yes, I think that's correct. I'll certainly confirm that in the briefing notes.
Okay. And any ideas on if we had can we have longer term investments to bring up the interest rate? Because I'm not sure that's just by virtue of the, variable interest rate, or whether can a local government have some funds invested in longer term deposits?
Yeah, we absolutely can do that. Our intention is to have a broader look at our investment policy, do that over the next couple of months and explore some of those options so that we can be a bit more creative and also open up better opportunities for non-fossil fuel investment as well.
Okay, because just noticing we're now at 0.5% average, which is still better than the Reserve Bank, but okay, any other questions? Okay. Item 7.4, authorisation of expenditure for 1st January to 31st of January 2021. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Happy for these to be on notice just for the briefing notes. The expenses related to APARC for parking machine maintenance, is that an annual amount or just for a smaller time or period? And I noticed that there was an entry that was earmarked as an annual subscription. I'm wondering if time could be added to recurring expenses or whether that would be too onerous. Second one, what's the payment to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage for amended DAP fees cover? There's a payment of about $4,500 for supply and installation of a bus shelter on William Street. What are the parameters for these, and is there scope for the city to be more innovative in their design when these are replaced? And also there was a range of entries for printing expenses, and wondering if admin has considered but decided against using local printers.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can quickly answer the one about the DAP fees. So that relates to the fees that the DAP takes from applicants, but it comes through the city. So for the administrative costs of them, the DAP secretariat arranging, organising the meetings, hosting the meetings, etc.
Through Mayor Cole, I can say we don't have a policy or a position around avoiding local suppliers for printing. In fact, our procurement policy does encourage us to use local suppliers. So I can say that that's certainly our approach. I can find out a little bit more information about those specific ones if you like.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for raising the APARC. Councillor Hallett was on my list. It might be helpful if, because I know these costs have come up before and some of them monthly, if we can get an indication of what the spend so far this financial year on that, and like Councillor Hallett raised, just a little bit more understanding about some of those items that have all been grouped into together. On the Cleanaway contract, 8th of January, notice it mentions recycling contract and Hyde Park event for almost $40,000. Can we get an indication of what event that was, and whether it was with one of the events that we are sponsors of, and maybe in kind component. 21st of October. I did say October, but I don't think so. It might be January 2021. The bee removal services. Just want to get an indication whether it's just removal or if there's a relocation component to that, and get a bit of an indication as to what. I didn't have enough time to look at what our policy is with regards to the handling of bees, whether we do have a requirement for them to be humanely relocated. And catering for city functions. I noticed there were a few of those, so I just want to get a bit of understanding about whether they were in-house functions, they were functions. So, for example, dinners for councillors, whether we can specify some of those. I know that the Christmas party for the seniors, that was specified nicely. That's all for me on that one. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any further questions on expenditure? Okay. Next item, financial statements as of 31st of January 2021. 7.6, mid-year review. Questions? No. Okay. Chief Executive Officer items, we've dealt with 8.1. 8.2, outcome of advertising and adoption of new policy, attendance at events policy. Questions? 8.3, amendment of fraud and corruption prevention policy. Right. 8.4, repeal of City of Vincent parking and parking facilities amendment local law 2020. Right. Okay. Adoption 8.5, adoption of council member, committee member and candidates code of conduct and CEO standards and approval of amendments to the council election period policy. .6, adoption of election signs policy. Yes, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Nicole. Just a question around the number of complaints that we received regarding election signage over the last two, say, election periods, and I guess this is to be taken on notice. And then if we could have a noting that this policy is severely more restrictive than our former one, whether those complaints were about signages that were already outside of our former policy, or whether they'd be addressed by this new policy. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Michael. Yes, they're good questions, and we can have a look at the complaints and look at the changes, and they were made like in line with the complaints we received at the last election.
So the objective of the policy says it recognises the need for election signs to be placed within the city during election periods, but works to minimise health and safety hazards and ensuring the amenity of the city land. I was just wondering if the city assesses the health and safety hazard of election signages any differently to any other signage around the city? Like, do election signs in particular pose an elevated harm to the health and safety that warrants additional regulation above and beyond the existing signs and advertising policy?
Through you, Nicole, perhaps only to the extent of the number, whether or not it forms. Sometimes it's the quality of the materials and whether they're flapping around and being blown off where they're meant to be, and therefore being removed from their fixings by the wind because they're not high quality permanent fixtures, as they're for a very short period of time. So no, within reason, because wind can pick these things up and cause a nuisance, or could fly across a road or the like, depending on where they're being positioned.
Splinters from dodgy, garden stakes from Bunnings with staple guns, staplers sticking out.
Okay. Sorry, I do have a couple more, Josh. Councillor Toppleberg. So the restrictions around the placement of them within the road reserve and adjacent footpaths and things like that are related to a health and safety hazard, or is the health and safety hazard dealt with by the other provisions around, how they should not move and flash and things like that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the decision to restrict them in areas adjacent to parks, if that's what you're referring to, that's sort of related to complaints we received at the last election. So that's where that's come from.
Okay. Have we done any assessment of where you would be able to place signs on the basis of this? Because the 50 metres from any intersection of any thoroughfares, that would require at least a 100 metre block. And for most thoroughfares around the city, we'd have block sizes of less than 100 metres.
Through you, Michael, we haven't been out to look, or we haven't done a map to show where you could now put them. That's something we can do, and we can see if we can do that prior to the council meeting. But basically, we've sort of updated this policy in line with complaints received and comments from elected members, and tried to do something that allows people to still put their signage out, but also prevents the proliferation of signage and signage in certain areas where we receive concerns.
Thank you.
So just further to Councillor Wallace's last question, if you include the 150 metres from the school zone and the 120 metres from a signalised intersection, or the intersection and the signalised intersection, I think I'd safely say it would be impossible to the only place you could put them is in residential areas where they have long continuous sections. There wouldn't be anywhere where a sign would be generally considered desirable that would have that. No, Loft Street would not. You wouldn't, if you're to be 120 metres from a signalised intersection and no more than 50 towards any other intersection, there wouldn't be a space. The principle of it, and I understand some of the discussions and some of the angst that was expressed, but I think if you could, perhaps it would be worthwhile looking back at some of those complaints, and particularly about things affixed to city infrastructure. I think that was a key part of it. So, public infrastructure, so affixed to poles or otherwise. I think that was a lot of it, and I'll make some comments next week. But my first assessment of reading the list meant that you could not put a sign anywhere other than perhaps some residential areas, but there would be nowhere that would be high traffic that would be able to accommodate a sign and be compliant.
Just a follow-on question from that, because the wording of that 2B says that a permit will not be required where it meets those criteria. So are there any situations that we're contemplating issuing a permit to put up election signage within 50 metres of an intersection, for example? And if so, what criteria will be using to determine whether it can receive a permit?
Through you, Nicole. So this is referring to the reference in the local law to requiring a permit, and then basically we have tried to strengthen the provisions about where signs can go by creating this policy and referring back to the local law and when a permit's required. So our proposal is that the signage would have to comply with these requirements in the policy to prevent the need for a permit, and that we wouldn't be issuing any further, any permits for signs. So all signs would have to comply with the requirements in the policy, but I can have a look into that more and provide some clarification in the briefing notes.
That would be good, thank you, because the way it reads is that a candidate who wanted to put their sign up that didn't satisfy all of these requirements could apply for a permit. It certainly gives the impression that that's an option available to you.
Through Mayor Cole, as an example, last Saturday there was a large bit of verge with a tree outside North Perth Town Hall. It was filled to the max with state election candidate signs, and as long as it was within the verge, not obstructing the footpath, and generally an appropriate place, wasn't causing either too much visual pollution because it was in the right place to serve its purpose, or a distraction for drivers or vehicle drivers, then the city would take a sensible and reasonable approach to placement of signage in appropriate areas.
So, that's a polling place. I don't know if this policy needs to deal specifically with polling places, and I do think there needs to be some recognition that if we have guidelines like this and you're having a contested election, it could lead to candidates, making complaints about other candidates. So if the city feels that this can't be, if you take the example, if we perhaps during the week we could take this election policy and overlay it over that example and see whether it's reasonable, because it is a policy, and then once you have it in place, it can form the basis of complaints between opposition candidates, opposition parties in state and federal elections. So I think we probably need some clarity around some of those issues, because it does say, for example, if you take that example, that it has to be 3 metres from the edge of the carriageway and half a metre from the footpath, and at least 50 metres from any intersection of thoroughfares, and not closer than 70 metres before any speed indicator sign. I think that would, I feel like I'm looking at this afresh. I'm just knowing this has been out for advertising, but it would be good to take that example and see whether this policy could lead to complaints in an example that is probably acceptable to the community, particularly for a polling place.
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, I just had 2 more quick ones. The section for the no election signs on city parks, number A, it says to restricts the use of the city's parks and reserves. It was just a minor technical thing. Should we include the road reserves adjacent parks in that, so it's not just the park itself? You can take that on notice.
Yeah, through you, Nicole. I think I'll check, and we could include those words, but basically we're already referring to the signs being on the road reserves, so I'm not sure if that is required, but we'll double check.
Okay, thank you. And then in just terms of managing the amenity impacts of election signage, did we consider introducing like a cap on the number of signs that were able to be placed on public land? And would that be appropriate?
Through you, Nicole, that's a good suggestion, and we can consider that. I don't think that's something that did come up when we discussed this previously.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Through you, Mayor, I know a lot of these, the criteria in this policy are already in place with a number of other councils in WA, so we can have actually had this in play, would have had it in play during the last state election and last year's local government election. Maybe if we can get a bit of an indication about the workability of it and gain some feedback as to whether the policies alleviated some of the issues that other councils had encountered.
Through you, Nicole, yes, thanks for that question. And I think when we presented this policy last time, which was a year ago or something, quite a while before we advertised, we did look into what other local governments are doing and sort of based it on best practice and advice on what we can do, because there's limits on how restrictive you can be about signage. So we'll look at that again and can provide further details, and also look at what implications that has had for other local governments when they've had more restrictive policies.
Just further to that, through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of, just on the question that Councillor Wallace had with regards to capping numbers. I'm not aware of any policies in local government that have followed on from some of the councils. I think in Queensland, not too sure whether, from memory, whether it was Byron Bay that, or some of the councils there have a maximum number of signs per candidate that can be installed in a particular area. So that might provide some background on that, and they've already been in play, and whether that's working or not.
Any further questions? Okay. Moving to results, 8.7, results of community consultation, future use of 10 Monmouth Street, Mount Lawley. Councillor Toppleberg.
Just noting that the recommendation notes the eco-zoning. Was the proposed eco-zoning mentioned in the consultation, or is that something that my assumption is that the submitters saw it as a binary, this is going to be a park or be sold, but the recommendation is including works to be done to the park. There were a number of requests for different things to be done. Have the submitters been engaged at all about what's proposed to be done in the financial year, or is that something that we should perhaps consider setting aside and having a further conversation with the submitters about what's proposed as a short, medium and long-term outcome for the site?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is something that is in the budget currently, but has also been, was basically an outcome of the comments received. So a lot were about what can be done to the park. And
do people understand that we're going to be getting rid of grass and putting things down other than grass in what is currently a grassed park, regardless of the state of the grass?
So through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't gone back to the submitters to specifically talk about, I guess, that, but we have, well, they've been provided with this report and recommendations, so they can see from that we're proposing to eco-zone. I guess we haven't talked to them about the fact that that means grass is replaced with mulch in that level of detail.
Okay, I'm just flagging an amendment to perhaps go through some of that process, just because my understanding is that eco-zoning, whilst well understood within this chamber, is probably something that it may surprise some people in terms of what happens to what they see as limited green open space as it is, and what that means for, and particularly some of the feedback. I can talk to it next week, but just flagging an amendment. Thank you.
Just one question in relation to, does eco-zoning include a tree?
Through Mayor Cole, so typically what we do, I'm sure you're all aware, is we spread the grass, mulch the area, and then we plant, using on National Tree Planting Day, we plant native shrubs and trees. So I think we've done it, where did we do it last year? Banks Reserve, so it's that kind of, so there will be planting. I think you know that we're always looking for locations to plant a tree, so we can easily use our tree planting budget to plant a tree or two there. That'd be quite straightforward.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just through you to the CEO with the recommendation number 6, and just to get a bit of understanding as to the workability of that. Any thought given to additional budget that would be required? Because from my experience, once you start embarking on that process of looking and expressing of interest, really, I suppose if you're going through that process in all seriousness, you need to have the money set aside in order to be able to move forward. Understanding that I certainly would require some sort of a business case and assessment on any considered land, but I just want to just ask whether there been consideration as to the budgetary implications of that particular recommendation and what additional costs that might be incurred by council.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we wouldn't be pursuing this actively, but we would be pursuing it opportunistically if we were made aware or we found out that a site was either potentially on the market or on the market. From an aerial shot of the zone we've identified as the better location for a corner park, for instance, there's quite a lot of new builds in the area, so there's only a limited number of corner sites with older buildings which haven't been redeveloped already. So I wouldn't be able to provide wouldn't be able to provide council with any sense of the probability of this happening over the next 1 or 2 years. But if the opportunity did arise, it would come back to council with a proposition which we don't have now, and we may not have in the short or medium term.
Through Mayor to CEO again, should we not be considering what the budget implications, financial implications are with that? So if it's going to require a decision, that we've at least made some consideration on the financial implications of that, understanding that these decisions don't have, in terms of approval, don't happen overnight.
Through Mayor Cole, if we identified or some member of the community identified for us a potential lot that could form a transaction, we would bring that information to council for a decision, including the budget implications. So it'd be hard to do that in advance until we knew what that site was, but we wouldn't be in a position. We wouldn't make an offer on anything until council had made a formal decision about that sometime in the future.
Can I just ask a question? I was slightly confused by the options and the recommendation, because I was sort of reading through the options and felt that this potentially was a mixture of option 1 and 2. And when it talked in option 2 about amenity upgrades required, it did talk about seating, lighting, path, shade. So how far is the administration recommending we go? If you're talking about eco-zoning, you've mentioned that we could plant a tree. Could we have a bench, and then we could potentially have something more in line with what the community was seeking? It might be more in line with option 2.
So we may call similar to a tree, a bench wouldn't be an issue. We could find that from our general budgets.
Thank you, Director. I think this is something that the community is very interested in, so I'm wondering if administration would be prepared to annotate that into recommendation 4, clause 4, if otherwise happy to flag it as an amendment. Okay, moving on to item 8.9, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 2nd of March 2021. No questions. 8.10, Local Government Statutory Compliance Audit Return 2020. And 8.11, Information Bulletin. Okay. So then we did have a request to, I'll just go to 9 first. Motions in which previous notice has been given, they're a nil. Representation on committees and public bodies, they're a nil. We did have a request to discuss the confidential attachment of item 6.1. So we will just have to go behind closed doors for that item. We don't require